Welcome, everyone, to another deep dive. And we have a genuinely fascinating stack of source materials to explore today.
We really do.
Yeah, if you're tuning in right now, you are probably the kind of person who enjoys dismantling things just to see how the gears turn inside.
Right, taking things apart.
Exactly.
Mm.
And usually we aim that curiosity at external subjects, like the mechanics of a new AI, or the history of a cultural phenomenon, or some new breakthrough in physics.
The big, complex stuff.
The big stuff. But today, we are turning that analytical microscope entirely inward onto something so ubiquitous, so deeply embedded in our everyday existence, that we almost never pause to consider the sheer engineering involved in making it work.
And that is human language.
Human language. Specifically, we have a pair of English language guides today.
Which sounds dry at first.
It really does. At a passing glance, they disguise themselves as simple instructional texts or, elementary grammar lessons.
Right, something from a middle school classroom?
Yeah, but when you look closer, when you actually start pulling apart the examples they use, they read much more like psychological instruction manuals.
They absolutely do.
Manuals for human interaction, vulnerability, and really the ancient art of storytelling.
I think that is the perfect lens through which to view these documents. Because let's be honest, when we bring up the topic of grammar, the immediate reaction for a lot of people is just to mentally check out.
Oh, instantly. Eyes glaze over.
Exactly. It brings up a very specific, often pretty unpleasant kind of nostalgia. You get flashbacks to sitting in a fluorescent lit classroom staring at a chalkboard, mechanically diagramming sentences.
Worrying about getting a red mark on a test.
Yes. It feels punitive. It feels like this rigid list of arbitrary rules designed primarily to make you feel inadequate if you happen to misplace a comma.
Like a trap?
Like a trap. But if we take a step back and connect these linguistic concepts to the broader picture of human cognition, these guides aren't actually about rules at all.
They're about architecture.
Precisely. They are the hidden, invisible architecture of how we construct reality for other people.
I love that.
They are the source code for how we take a chaotic, completely subjective experience from inside our own heads and successfully transplant it into the mind of someone else.
And that is exactly our mission for today's deep dive. Let me assure you right now, listener, there is going to be no pop quiz at the end of this.
No grading syntax here.
We are not here to grade your syntax. Instead, our objective is to decode the specific mechanical language tools that every single one of us relies on to narrate life's most unpredictable moments.
The messy moments.
The messy moments. We're going to examine the cognitive tools we use to describe sudden interruptions, how we process the shock of an accident, and the absolute high-stakes precision required when something valuable goes missing.
Navigating the lost and found.
Exactly. Ultimately, we are going to deconstruct the exact mechanics of how a story functions when the universe decides to throw a wrench into your day.
And to really ground this concept, before we even look at the text, I want you, the listener, to do a quick mental exercise.
Okay, set the scene.
Think about the last time you sat down with a friend, maybe over coffee or a drink, and tried to convey the sheer frustration of a day where absolutely everything went off the rails.
We all know that kind of day.
You know exactly the kind of day I am talking about. Or, alternatively, think about that very specific, bubbling cocktail of panic and embarrassment you feel when you are trying to describe a lost item to a stranger working behind a customer service desk.
Like at a busy airport.
A busy airport is the perfect example. There is a palpable spike in adrenaline that accompanies those moments. Your brain is racing, and yet you have to force your language to be clear.
Right, you can't just flail your arms. You have to use words.
You have to use the tools. And what this deep dive will reveal are those linguistic tricks. The levers, the pulleys, the cognitive shortcuts that native speakers instinctively use to make those chaotic stories dynamic and instantly understandable.
By making these invisible mechanics visible, we're essentially handing you a master key to more compelling empathetic communication.
That's the goal.
So let's open up the toolkit. We are going to start with the first source document from our stack, which deals heavily with the concept of accidents and interruptions.
Right.
And right out of the gate, it introduces what I'm going to categorize as the vocabulary of chaos.
I like that title.
The text provides this foundational list of words. Let me just read them. Interruption, accident, suddenly, to slip, to drop, to break, to crash, and bad luck.
It really paints a picture.
It sounds less like a grammar lesson and more like a police report from a slapstick comedy routine.
It does. And what is immediately striking about that specific cluster of words is their overwhelming physicality.
Yes, the verbs especially.
Think about them: to slip, to drop, to break, to crash.
Yeah.
These are not abstract philosophical concepts that you ponder in an armchair.
No, they're violent.
Very violent. Sudden interactions with the physical environment, they represent gravity taking over or momentum failing, and they all orbit around the central defining concept of an interruption.
Which the text defines pretty literally.
Right, it defines an interruption as when someone or something stops you in the middle of an action.
And a series of unfortunate events is just when these bad things happen one right after another.
Cascade of disruption.
Exactly. And as I was reviewing this vocabulary list, the single word that really jumped off the page as the most powerful tool in the set wasn't one of the violent verbs. No, it was the adverb, suddenly.
Ah, yes.
Just feels like the absolute linchpin of any decent story involving a disaster.
That is a really keen observation, and it brings up a fascinating point regarding narrative structure.
Because it carries so much weight.
It does. Why does a relatively simple adverb like suddenly carry so much psychological weight for the listener? If we analyze its function in real-time conversation, the word suddenly acts as a cognitive pivot point.
A pivot point.
It serves as a stark line of demarcation in a narrative. It is the precise moment where the story stops being a recounting of a mundane, predictable sequence of daily events and instantly transforms into an unpredictable, chaotic event.
It's like a jump scare.
It functions essentially as the linguistic equivalent of a jump scare in a thriller film. When you are listening to a friend tell a story and they drop the word suddenly, your brain physically reacts.
Your posture might shift.
Your auditory processing sharpens. You intuitively understand that the established status quo of the narrative has just been irrevocably shattered.
You are lulled into this false sense of security, maybe even tuning out slightly because the story is just about someone's morning commute and then, bam, the cognitive spike hits.
Right.
Which transitions us perfectly into the foundational grammatical concept the text uses to explain this phenomenon. The guide breaks down the structure of storytelling into two opposing forces.
The long action versus the short action.
Yes. They frame this dynamically as setting the scene versus the main event. And here is where the actual mechanics come into play, because the text maps this conceptual idea directly onto English verb tenses.
Okay, break that down for us.
So, the long action, the background hum of the story, is constructed using the past continuous tense. So you are looking at phrases like, I was sleeping, I was walking, or I was driving.
The setup.
The setup. Conversely, the short action, the sudden interruption, is built using the past simple tense. Phrases like, the phone rang, I fell, or a deer jumped out.
The visual analogy the source material provides to explain this grammatical interplay is highly effective.
Oh, the line thing.
Yes. I want to try and translate that visual into an auditory experience for you, the listener. Close your eyes for a second if you can, and imagine a long, continuous, gently undulating, wavy line drawn across a blank canvas.
Okay, I've got it.
It is just rolling along, peaceful, rhythmic, and completely uninterrupted. That wavy line represents the long action.
The past continuous tense.
Exactly. I was sleeping, the wind was blowing, the music was playing. It implies a sustained state of being with no immediate end in sight.
Very peaceful.
Very peaceful. Now, over top of that canvas, I want you to visualize a sharp, violent, jagged X slashing directly through the center of that gentle, wavy line.
Ouch.
That sharp X is the short action. It is the disruption. That is the past simple tense driven by a sudden, singular event.
Like the phone rang.
Exactly. It slices right through the continuity, terminated the peaceful state of the wavy line.
But wait, let me push back on this framework for a second because it sounds incredibly rigid. Do we really need both elements to tell a story?
What do you mean?
Like, if a car crashes into a tree, isn't the crash itself the story? Do we always need the background hum?
That is a great question. Strictly speaking, you can communicate facts without the background. You could just say, I drove, a deer ran out, I crashed.
Right, that gets the point across.
It conveys raw data, but the distinction here is the difference between conveying raw data and actually storytelling.
Yeah.
Facts alone don't elicit empathy. To make the listener actually feel the impact of the crash, you have to establish what the baseline was before the crash happened. The contrast is what creates the emotional resonance.
So the wavy line is the emotional baseline.
Yes. I was driving home, listening to my favorite podcast, just enjoying the empty road that sets up an emotional baseline of comfort.
And then the X comes in.
When you then introduce the sharp X, when suddenly a deer jumped out, The listener feels the jarring loss of that comfort. Without the background hum, the sudden spike has nothing to stand out against. It is just noise.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. The contrast creates the impact. So how do we actually fuse these two opposing forces together? How do we link the steady background state and the sudden rupture within a single cohesive thought?
The text gives us two tiny yet incredibly critical connective tools.
The words when and while.
Yes, and it establishes a very strict set of rules for how to deploy them.
The source material treats these two words as the fundamental glue of narrative interruption. The core rule laid out is that the word while is permanently affiliated with the long action.
It wraps around the continuous state.
Grammatically, you would build the structure as, while I was cooking. You are signaling to the listener that an extended duration of time is occurring.
And on the flip side, the word when acts as the trigger mechanism for the short action, the sudden spike.
So you would say, when I cut my finger.
Exactly. So if we synthesize those elements into a complete thought, we get a perfectly engineered sentence. While I was cooking, I cut my finger.
Or if we utilize the other trigger, I was cooking when I cut my finger. It's almost algebraic. You have variable A, the background, and variable B, the disruption, and these connecting words act as the equal signs.
It is highly formulaic. But the true brilliance of English syntax lies in its flexibility.
How so?
The text specifically highlights that you can completely invert the structure without altering the fundamental facts of the event. You can flip the sentence architecture entirely.
Give me an example.
You can say, the phone rang while I was sleeping, instead of the standard, while I was sleeping, the phone rang.
Now, on a purely factual level, those two sentences convey the exact same data. The timeline hasn't changed. But psychologically speaking, if you are the one telling the story, why would you actively choose one order over the other?
It's a great choice to have.
Does flipping the syntax actually change how the listener physically or emotionally reacts to the anecdote?
Absolutely. And it speaks to how much subconscious control we have over pacing. It is all about manipulating the listener's anticipation.
Okay, I'm tracking.
If you choose to start your sentence with the continuous background state,
Right.
while I was sleeping, you are actively building suspense. You are signaling to the listener, here is the peaceful baseline, now wait for it because something is coming.
You are forcing them to hold their breath for the disruption. You are stretching out the tension.
You are making them wait for the other shoe to drop.
And if you flip it,
and lead with the sudden rupture, the phone rang. You are prioritizing shock over suspense. You are delivering the jump scare immediately, grabbing their attention by the collar and only filling in the contextual background after the fact.
the phone rang while I was sleeping.
Exactly. It drastically alters the emotional delivery. The first structure is akin to a slow, creeping camera pan down a dark hallway that ends with a monster jumping out of a closet.
And the second structure.
Is opening the movie scene with the monster already screaming directly into the camera lens and then slowly panning back to reveal that the victim was just trying to get some sleep.
That is a fantastic analogy. It really shows how you can be a director of your own daily anecdotes just by moving the word while around.
You really are a director.
But the text doesn't only deal with chaos. It also introduces a secondary concept that I found quite lovely, which we can call the no interruption zone.
Ah, parallel actions.
Yes, it outlines the grammar of parallel actions. This occurs when you have two continuous background states happening simultaneously, without either one interrupting or stopping the other.
The prime example they offer is a picture of domestic tranquility. While I was reading, Anna was working.
So in our visual framework, we have two gentle, wavy lines running parallel to each other. There is no jagged slash anywhere on the canvas.
Precisely. And if you look at the grammatical engine driving that sentence, you'll notice that both clauses are utilizing the past continuous tense. Was reading alongside, was working.
Right.
When a speaker deploys this symmetrical tense structure, it generates a profound sense of temporal harmony. It communicates to the listener these two extended states of being coexisted in the same physical or temporal space perfectly peacefully without friction.
It stands in stark contrast to the violent linguistic collisions we just analyzed.
It paints a mental image of a quiet room, two individuals deeply engaged in their own independent tasks, entirely undisturbed by the other.
It's actually a very soothing sentence to hear. While I was reading, Anna was working. But unfortunately, we are not here to talk about peaceful domestic life.
No, we are here for the chaos.
We're here to analyze how things fall apart. To really put these architectural rules to the text provides a brilliant case study. It is a short narrative simply titled, A series of unfortunate events.
Featuring our protagonist, Lukas.
Yes, a guy named Lucas who is enduring a catastrophically bad morning. I want to read through the timeline of his bad day, and as we go, let's stop and forensically analyze the linguistic mechanics of each disaster.
That's a perfect exercise. Let's deconstruct the architecture of Lukas's misery.
Okay, here we go. Disaster number 1. The text reads, "While he was taking a shower, the water suddenly stopped. He was cold and wet."
All right, let's examine the first blow. Grammatically, this is the textbook foundational setup. We have the word, while firmly attached to the long action, taking a shower.
The ultimate continuous baseline.
Exactly. Think about the psychological state of taking a shower. It is a deeply vulnerable, highly continuous state. You are unclothed, you are confined in a small, slippery box, and your comfort is entirely reliant on an uninterrupted flow of warm water.
And then comes the rupture.
The water suddenly stopped. It utilizes our favorite cognitive pivot, suddenly. But look at the verb, stopped. Past simple. It is absolute.
It didn't fade out.
No, the water didn't gradually fade. It didn't slow down to a trickle. It ceased to be. The grammar perfectly mirrors the abrupt physical shock of the interruption. You can almost feel the jarring sensation of being suddenly freezing cold and covered in soap just through the syntax.
It is entirely visceral. You immediately pity the guy. Okay, so Lucas gets out of the freezing shower. He tries to recover his morning routine. Disaster number 2. Then he went to the kitchen. While he was making coffee, he dropped the cup. Smash. Coffee was everywhere.
We are seeing a distinct escalation here. Again, the author establishes the comforting rhythmic baseline. While he was making coffee,
Sacred morning ritual.
it relies heavily on muscle memory. It is a flowing, continuous action that we perform while our brains are still booting up for the day. Then, the inevitable spike. He dropped the cup.
Past simple.
Immediate. Final. But what elevates this from a simple mistake to a visceral disaster is the inclusion of the sensory interruption. Smash.
Oh, this is terrible.
It is no longer just a continuous action that was halted. It is an action that birthed a chaotic, messy physical consequence in the real world. The comforting routine of his morning isn't just interrupted, it is quite literally shattered into sharp pieces on the kitchen floor.
I can vividly hear that smash in my head. It is universally recognized as the worst possible sound to hear before 8 a.m.
Truly.
Right, so Lucas cleans up the shards in the spilled coffee. He tries to salvage his productivity. Disaster number 3. Later, he tried to work. But while he was recording a podcast, his neighbor started playing the drums. Boom, boom, boom.
Notice how the nature of the interruption has evolved.
Yeah, it's different now.
We have transitioned from a purely physical shock in the shower to a sensory mess in the kitchen, and now we arrive at an auditory disruption of deep cognitive focus.
The absolute worst kind.
It is a uniquely infuriating type of torture. The continuous state here, while he was recording a podcast, is highly mental. It requires sustained concentration, flow state, and crucially, silence.
The baseline is his mental focus.
Yes. But the rupture comes from a source completely outside of his physical control. His neighbor started playing the drums. The past simple verb started acts as the trigger mechanism.
But the consequence is ongoing.
Exactly. The resulting consequence is a rhythmic, repeating sonic intrusion that makes returning to the continuous state impossible. You cannot maintain the delicate cognitive balance required to record audio when the external environment violently and repeatedly intrudes. It is the absolute death of concentration.
The frustration is palpable. I'm getting stressed just reading about it. I think anyone who has ever tried to work in a thin-walled apartment can empathize with the specific rage of sudden neighbor noise.
Oh, definitely.
So, Lucas is utterly defeated. He throws his hands up. Disaster number 4. The grand finale of his morning. Lucas decided to go to sleep. But when he closed his eyes, the alarm clock rang. Poor Lucas.
This is a masterpiece of tragicomedy.
It really is.
And it is entirely driven by a syntactic shift. Look closely at the structural architecture of this final sentence. For the first 3 disasters, the author relied on a steady rhythm, while plus long action.
While he was showering, while he was making coffee, while he was recording.
We, the listeners, were conditioned to expect that specific cadence, the long build-up followed by the crash. But for the ultimate punchline, the author flips the script. They abandon while and deploy the secondary rule, when plus short action. When he closed his eyes.
You know, I read that sentence 3 times and didn't even consciously register that shift until you pointed it out. Why does that change make the ending feel so much more defeating?
Because it radically accelerates the pacing of the narrative.
Yeah.
When he closed his eyes is a very brief, decisive, finite action. He is attempting to initiate a new baseline of rest.
But the universe says no.
The universe responds instantaneously with a second, equally short action. The alarm clock rang. There is no long, comforting setup allowed here. There is no continuous state of peace granted to him. The exact millisecond he tries to retreat from the world, the disruption hits him. It is the structural equivalent of the universe slamming a door in his face.
That is a brilliant breakdown. It really highlights how you don't need highly flowery language or complex adjectives to tell a compelling story about a terrible day. You just need to know how to manipulate the pacing of your verbs.
It's all in the pacing.
So the takeaway here for the listener is clear. If you ever need to convey to your partner or your friend just how relentlessly the universe was targeting you on a Tuesday, mastering the interplay of these when and while structures is your best tool.
You aren't just reciting a dry list of complaints.
Right. You are actively dragging the listener through the same emotional roller coaster of interrupted peace that you experienced.
Precisely. You are using the invisible machinery of syntax to engineer empathy in your listener.
Okay, so we have thoroughly explored the grammar of time and the architecture of disruption. We understand how to navigate the timeline of a disaster as it is happening.
But what happens next?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears. What happens in the aftermath? What happens to our language when the immediate chaos subsides, the dust settles, and you realize that the collision or the distraction has actually cost you something physical?
When things go missing.
When the story is no longer about when a disaster happened, but what specifically is now missing. This thematic pivot brings us to Section 3 of our exploration. The art of precision, navigating the lost and found.
It is a profound shift in narrative focus because the second source document we are analyzing moves us entirely out of the active kinetic timeline of accidents and deposits us into the stagnant, highly bureaucratic, and deeply stressful environment of a lost and found office.
And naturally, the vocabulary of the text shifts to match this new reality. We leave behind the kinetic verbs like suddenly, slip, and crash, and we are introduced to a static world comprised almost entirely of nouns, objects. The text gives us a new set of parameters: backpack, wallet, umbrella, ID card. These are the mundane yet vital physical artifacts that tether us to our daily lives.
And alongside this new vocabulary, the text introduces a character archetype that serves as the perfect vessel for this lesson.
The absent-minded protagonist.
Yes, the absent-minded protagonist. The guide defines an absent-minded individual simply as someone who forgets things easily. Interestingly, it explicitly notes that our friend Lukas, who just survived the morning from hell, happens to be a deeply absent-minded person.
Which honestly tracks perfectly. If my morning involved freezing water, shattered ceramics, and a surprise drum solo, my cognitive load would be completely maxed out. I would absolutely leave my backpack on the subway.
Anyone would.
But from an educational standpoint, why rely on this specific personality trait? Why is the absent-minded character the ideal engine to drive a lesson about grammatical precision?
Because being prone to losing things is the ultimate high-stakes catalyst for requiring incredibly precise, descriptive language. Think about the psychology of possession. When your backpack is safely slung over your shoulder, it requires no description.
It's just my backpack.
It is simply my backpack. You don't have to articulate its features to anyone. Its presence is a given. However, the exact second you leave it on a train, its physical reality vanishes and it transforms into an abstract concept.
That's terrifying.
Now, you are tasked with materializing that missing object using nothing but the air coming out of your lungs. You have to paint a picture of it in the mind of a skeptical stranger so accurately, so specifically, that they can walk into a back room containing 500 similar items and retrieve the one that belongs to you.
It's a huge burden.
The absent-minded person is forced by their own nature to become an absolute master of this specific linguistic puzzle on a regular basis.
And that reality brings us to the most critical question highlighted in the text. It is the inevitable, dreaded question you will hear from the officer working the desk at any lost and found in the world.
What does it look like?
What does it look like? It sounds like such a benign, simple inquiry, but it actually demands a highly sophisticated, multi-layered grammatical response. You cannot simply answer with the base noun.
No, you can't.
If you look at the officer and say, a backpack, They will just stare at you. The room behind them is a graveyard of generic backpacks.
To answer this question effectively and reunite with your property, you must deploy what the text refers to as relative clauses.
Okay, relative clauses. That immediately sounds like the kind of heavy textbook jargon that makes people tune out. Can we demystify that term? Because underneath the academic label, it's really just a functional tool for linking ideas together, right?
Exactly. Try not to think of it as a rule. Think of it as a linguistic bridge. A relative clause is simply a mechanism used to connect two distinct pieces of information together in order to isolate a specific target out of a crowd.
Okay, break that down.
You have your primary thought. I am looking for a backpack. And you have a secondary defining detail. The backpack is bright green. A relative clause allows you to weld those two separate sentences together into one efficient, laser-focused statement. I am looking for the backpack, which is bright green.
The bridge allows you to refine the noun until it is unmistakable.
Yes.
And the text lays down a very rigid, binary set of rules for how to construct these bridges in English. It establishes what I'll call the who versus which divide.
It is presented as an absolute non-negotiable law of the language.
If you are building a bridge to describe a human being, you must use the word WHO. The example given is the man who is working here. Conversely, if you are building a bridge to describe an inanimate object or an animal, you must use the word WCH, the bag which is on the table.
That is the fundamental divide. Who is reserved exclusively for people and which is relegated to things. It seems incredibly straightforward on paper, but the guide dedicates a significant amount of focus and warning to a very specific, pervasive mistake made by learners of the language.
Deploying which to describe a person.
Yes, they provide the incorrect example. The man which works here. The text is quite emphatic about this, actually appending an exclamation point to the directive. Never use which for people.
I want to dig into that warning for a moment. Obviously, the man which works here is grammatically incorrect. You'd lose a point on a test. But beyond the mechanics, why is it treated as such a cardinal sin?
It's deeper than just grammar.
Right, like if I accidentally slip up in conversation and use which for a person, is the listener genuinely offended or does it just sound a little clunky? Why does the text treat it with such urgency?
It's a really profound question because it touches on how grammar reflects human cognitive mapping. We tend to think of grammar as arbitrary rules, but it often mirrors how our brains instinctively categorize reality.
How so?
Evolutionarily, human brains are hardwired to instantly distinguish between an agent, a human who has intention, who can act, who can be a threat or an ally, and an object, a rock, a tree, a backpack, which has no agency and is only acted upon.
Okay, that makes sense.
English grammar strictly enforces this cognitive map through its relative pronouns. Who signals to the brain, pay attention, we are discussing an agent. Which signals, we are discussing an object.
So when you mix them up?
When you say the man which, you are causing a glitch in the listener's cognitive map. You are linguistically taking a human being with agency and forcing them into the mental category reserved for inanimate objects.
Wow.
Now, is the listener consciously outraged? Probably not. But on a subconscious visceral level, it feels wrong. It feels mildly dehumanizing, even if it is entirely accidental. It violates an implicit, deeply ingrained social contract within the language that dictates that human beings, by virtue of their humanity, are granted their own dedicated connecting word.
It distracts the listener because their brain has to briefly pause and correct the categorization error.
Exactly.
That is fascinating. It elevates a simple grammar rule into a reflection of how we perceive humanity. So, who isn't just a word. It is an acknowledgement of personhood. It's a subtle sign of linguistic respect.
Precisely. It acknowledges that the subject possesses a soul, for lack of a better term.
Okay, so the binary is clear. Who for people, which for things. But English is rarely that simple, and the text immediately introduces a complication in Section 4. It introduces a third option that functions almost like a linguistic skeleton key.
It brings in the word that.
Ah, yes. The word that is the great equalizer of English relative clauses. Under many common circumstances, specifically in what grammarians call defining clauses, where the information is essential to identifying the noun, the word that can function as a universal, interchangeable substitute.
It has the power to replace both the human who and the inanimate which.
So practically speaking, if I am in a rush and don't have the mental bandwidth to carefully sort my nouns into human and non-human categories, I can just blanket everything with that. I can say, the man that works here and the bag that is on the table. And native speakers won't bat an eye.
Exactly. Both of those constructions are perfectly acceptable, widely understood, and remarkably common in everyday speech. Using that as casual, it is highly efficient, and it completely bypasses the strict human versus non-human cognitive mapping we just discussed. It is a safe harbor when you are speaking quickly.
But the guide doesn't stop at just providing a substitute word. It plunges into what it explicitly frames as the most complex, yet most rewarding concept in the entire syllabus.
The invisible pronoun.
Yes, it teaches the ability to eliminate the connective bridge entirely, to make the pronoun completely invisible. The text pitches this omission as the ultimate secret to achieving a fast, fluid, informal native sound.
This is where language transitions from basic communication into an art form of sheer efficiency. We are talking about the mechanics of omission. But it is crucial to understand that you cannot simply hack words out of a sentence randomly.
Right. There are rules.
There is a highly specific, very elegant rule governing when you can make a pronoun disappear. The rule dictates: if the relative pronoun is functioning as the object of the sentence, and it is immediately followed by a brand new subject, a pronoun like I, you, he, she, or we, then, and only then, can you delete the connective word completely.
I always assumed that when native speakers dropped words like that, or which, it was just a product of laziness or casual slang. But you were saying it is actually a highly regulated structural rule of omission.
It is entirely structural. It isn't laziness, it is linguistic aerodynamics.
Let's walk the listener through the evolution of a sentence to demonstrate this magic trick in action. Let's start with the most formal, rigid, textbook version of our lost and found scenario. The sentence is, "the bag which I lost."
That sentence is grammatically flawless, but it feels stiff and heavy. Let's look at the components. The bag is the object that you are attempting to define, which is your required non-human connector. I is the brand new subject, the agent who performed the action of losing.
Right. So step 2 in the evolution. We swap out the formal, which, for our universal multi-tool, that. The sentence becomes, "the bag that I lost."
Already it sounds better. It is slightly smoother, a bit more conversational. You've removed the somewhat clinical edge of the word which.
And now, the final transformation. We check the parameters of the rule, we have the object we are defining, the bag, we have the connector, and we have the new subject, I, stepping in immediately after. The conditions are met. So we delete the bridge entirely. The sentence collapses into, "the bag I lost."
The bag I lost. It is sleek. It is practically invisible. You have successfully conveyed the exact same payload of specific pinpoint information as the first clunky version, but you have stripped away all the unnecessary linguistic friction.
Linguistic aerodynamics. I love that framing. But why do we do it? Why does English have this built-in mechanism for shedding words?
Because language adapts to human necessity, and often human necessity involves panic.
Panic makes us speak faster.
Yes. When we analyze the utility of this omission rule, it makes perfect sense why native speakers instinctively gravitate toward it, particularly in high-stress environments like a lost and found office. When you are agitated, when you are frantically trying to recover a passport or a wallet, your brain is in triage mode.
You don't have time for grammar.
You do not want to expend valuable breath or cognitive energy constructing structural bridges. You want to deliver the core data as fast as possible. The nouns and the verbs are the only things that matter. Bag. I lost. Dropping the words which or that actively accelerates the transmission of the message. It removes the speed bumps from your speech.
To vividly illustrate this concept of speed versus friction, the source text provides another fantastic narrative case study. It's a scripted dialogue titled "Chaos at the Lost and Found."
Ah, Lukas returns.
Our notoriously absent-minded protagonist, Lukas, has finally navigated his way to the correct office, and he is engaged in a conversation with the clerk, Officer Anna. I want to read through this exchange and dissect it because it perfectly models the exact struggle between formal structure and natural speech that we are discussing.
Let's analyze it. This dialogue is a masterclass in how grammatical choices reveal a character's internal state.
Okay, the scene opens with Lukas approaching the counter. He is clearly flustered. He says to the officer, "Hello, I am looking for a backpack which I lost yesterday."
I want to stop right there and look at Lukas's syntax. Notice how remarkably clunky and formal he sounds. A backpack which I lost. He is deploying the full, rigid relative clause. He hasn't dropped the pronoun. It sounds almost robotic, doesn't it?
It really does.
But psychologically, this makes perfect sense. It reflects his acute anxiety. When people are stressed, especially when speaking to a perceived authority figure like an officer, they often hypercorrect their language.
They try too hard.
He is trying so hard to be precise and clear that he defaults to the textbook structure, and as a result, he sounds entirely unnatural. He hasn't mastered the confidence required for the invisible pronoun.
That is such a relatable human reaction. You get nervous, and suddenly you sound like an 18th century aristocrat. So Anna, the officer, responds to him. She asks, "What does the backpack that you lost look like?"
Notice the subtle shift in Anna's language. She abandons the formal and utilizes the universal multi-tool, the backpack that you lost. She is a professional bureaucrat. She has this conversation 50 times a day. Her language is clear, it is professional, but it is fundamentally more casual and fluid than Lucas's panicked formality.
So Lucas tries to process her question, and he attempts to describe his bag. He replies, "It is a backpack which is green," and which I love very much.
Oh, the tragedy of poor Lucas.
It hurts to read.
He is really leaning on that word like a crutch, which is green, which I love. He is stringing these very heavy formal clauses together in a desperate attempt to be understood. But instead of sounding clear, it makes him sound pathetic.
He's trying to show emotion.
He is trying to convey deep emotional attachment. I love it very much, but he is bogging that emotion down in rigid, bureaucratic syntax. It's a tragic clash of feeling and form.
It really paints a pathetic mental image of him sweating at the counter. So Anna processes his clunky description. She sighs, goes to the back room, and hauls out a massive cardboard box. She pulls out a random item and asks him, "Is this the book that you seek?"
There is a lovely little narrative Easter egg here in the text. It notes that the book she pulls out is soaking wet. This is clearly a callback to his earlier disaster where his morning shower suddenly turned freezing.
That's hilarious.
But returning to the grammar, Anna is consistently maintaining her use of that. The book that you seek.
Lucas shakes his head in defeat. He realizes the extent of his absent-mindedness. He says to her, "No, I am also looking for the keys which open my car."
He is an absolute walking disaster. He didn't merely misplace a green backpack. He has managed to lose his means of transportation as well. And structurally, he is still trapped in his formal loop. He continues to deploy the keys which open my car.
And this endless cycle of lost items and clunky grammar finally pushes the scene to its climax. Anna's patience evaporates. She is completely exasperated. She lets out a heavy sigh, stares directly at him, and delivers this absolutely devastating conclusion. "Sir, you are a man who loses everything."
It is the perfect, stinging punchline to the scene. But from an analytical perspective, it is a grammatical masterpiece. Look closely at how Anna wields the word who, a man who loses everything.
She switches tools.
She is no longer just using a relative clause to identify a missing object or describe a past action. She is weaponizing the grammar to define his core psychological identity. She links the base noun man directly to the ultimate, inescapable defining trait. Loses everything.
That is brutal.
And crucially, she reverts to the strict binary rule. She rightfully uses who because, despite his immense flaws and the headache he is causing her, she still acknowledges his underlying humanity. She doesn't reduce him to an object by saying a man which loses everything.
It's hilarious. It plays out like a microscopic, linguistic Shakespearean tragedy. This poor guy walks into the office just hoping to find his green bag, and he walks out having received a devastating, grammatically flawless psychological profile from a stranger, a man who loses everything.
It perfectly encapsulates the broader lesson. Relative clauses are not just utilitarian tools for locating missing umbrellas. They are the fundamental instruments we use to categorize reality, to judge the world around us, and to define the people we interact with. We sort humanity by what they do, and we bind those definitions together with the word who.
Which provides a seamless transition into Section 5 of our deep dive, Advanced Descriptions and Interactive Synthesis. The guide throws one final, advanced piece of the puzzle at us before concluding. We have comprehensively covered who, which, that, and the sleek art of the invisible pronoun. Now, the text introduces a new relative word, whose, spelled W-H-O-S-E. It utilizes this specific word to indicate possession or a state of belonging.
Yes, whose is a uniquely elegant and powerful connector. It is deployed specifically when an object or a trait belongs intrinsically to a person. The text offers a few examples that are surprisingly evocative for a grammar guide it gives us. That is the girl whose phone was stolen. And that is the dog whose owner is looking for it.
I'm curious about the mechanics of this one. How does whose function differently on a psychological level than the other bridges we've analyzed? If I say the girl that had her phone stolen versus the girl whose phone was stolen, is there a meaningful difference in how the listener perceives the situation?
There is a subtle but profound difference in the emotional weight. While who and which simply connect a noun to a static action or a physical state, whose connects a noun to a relationship.
a relationship.
It weaves an immediate chain of empathy and responsibility into the fabric of the sentence. When you choose to say, the girl whose phone was stolen, you are doing more than just identifying a random girl in a crowd. You are linguistically binding her identity directly to a state of loss and victimization.
You feel for her immediately.
You are forcing the listener to recognize the intimate relationship between her and the missing object. It is an inherently empathetic structure. Consider the second example, the dog whose owner is looking for it. That single word whose instantly generates a poignant emotional narrative of separation, anxiety, and longing. It elevates the animal from a stray to a loved entity.
It never ceases to amaze me how much emotional manipulation can be packed into a single 5-letter word. Now, to synthesize all of these disparate rules and theories, the source text concludes the instructional portion with an interactive exercise. It's titled The Who or Which Game.
I love this part.
The premise is a rapid-fire guessing game where Anna, our lost and found clerk, provides a fragmented clue, and Lukas has to utilize deductive reasoning and the correct relative clause pathway to identify the mystery object. I want to walk the listener through this exercise, not just to hear the answers, but to observe how fast the native brain processes these categories in real time.
I think that is the correct approach. The answers themselves are elementary. The cognitive sorting process required to reach them is what's truly fascinating.
Exactly. Okay, prompt 1. Anna states, it is a person who teaches students.
Let's freeze time for a microsecond right after Anna says the word person. Notice what happens in the subconscious. The exact millisecond that noun drops, Lukas's brain, and ideally the listener's brain, instantly discards half of the English language.
It locks entirely onto the human categorization pathway.
It preloads the word WHO before she even finishes the sentence. The bridge is built. A person WHO teaches students. The deductive answer is obvious, a teacher. But the speed of the grammatical sorting is the real marvel.
It's pure reflex. Okay, prompt 2. Anna pivots. She says, it is a machine which washes clothes.
Same cognitive process, entirely different pathway. The noun machine triggers the non-human map. The brain instantly cues up the word which ways, a machine which washes clothes. Oh, washing machine. We perform this binary sorting process thousands of times a day without burning a single calorie of conscious effort.
Prompt 3. Anna introduces a twist. She says, it is a drink that is black and wakes me up.
Here, Anna shifts gears and relies on the multi-tool. A drink is an inanimate thing, so the strict rule dictates she could have used which. But she chooses the fluid, casual route and drops in that. A drink that is black. It flows without friction. And Lukas, utilizing his deductive skills, guesses correctly. Coffee.
Which, in a brilliant piece of narrative irony, is the exact substance he violently dropped all over his kitchen floor during his morning of chaos.
I love that the guide included that callback. It rewards the attentive reader.
And finally, we arrive at prompt 4, which the text explicitly labels as the joke. Anna looks at him and says, he is a podcaster who forgets everything.
The narrative comes full circle. Anna initiates the clue with the pronoun he, unequivocally establishing a human subject. The grain demands WHO. He is a podcaster. WHO forgets everything. And Lukas finally achieves a moment of self-awareness.
Wait, that is me.
She got him.
She has once again used a defining clause to deliver a gentle but incredibly accurate roast of his character.
It's a brilliantly constructed little exercise. So, as we maneuver toward the outro of our deep dive today, let's take a collective breath and summarize the actual practical aha moments we've managed to extract from these two deceptively simple language guides.
We have certainly covered a lot of ground. We began by dissecting the very architecture of time and narrative disruption. We explored how to effectively slice through a peaceful, sustained state of being, that continuous wavy line with its sudden, jagged interruption.
Right.
We analyzed the cognitive impact of words like suddenly and how manipulating the placement of when and while allows a storyteller to oscillate between building agonizing suspense and delivering an immediate shock. We basically learned how to weaponize syntax to ensure that our stories about having a terrible day are emotionally engaging rather than just whiny. And then we transitioned from the kinetic timeline of events to the stagnant reality of lost physical objects.
We examined how to carve out the precise, unmistakable description of a person or a thing from thin air by utilizing relative clauses.
We uncovered the implicit respect for humanity embedded in the word who, the functional utility which, and the sleek, casual perfection of the universal multi-tool that.
And, perhaps most crucially for anyone seeking to communicate more naturally, we decoded the magic trick of the invisible pronoun. We explored the strict parameters that allow us to omit connective words entirely, achieving that fast, aerodynamic, frictionless speech that native speakers rely on when they are panicked or in a hurry.
So, as is our tradition on the deep dives, we have to ask the ultimate question. So what? Why should any of this matter to the listener who has spent the last hour tuning in? Why should someone outside of a linguistics department care about the subtle distinctions between past continuous and past simple, or the rules governing when it is acceptable to delete a pronoun?
They should care deeply, because these are not abstract academic rules invented by archaic grammarians sitting in dusty libraries just to make standardized tests more difficult. These are the highly practical, everyday mechanisms that every single one of us relies on to make our personal experiences intelligible to the rest of the world.
It's how we share our lives.
These invisible structures are what make your anecdotes thrilling, engaging, and worthy of someone else's attention. But more importantly in that, these are the fundamental tools that guarantee we are clearly understood when we find ourselves in distress.
When things go wrong.
When your luggage vanishes at the airport, when your workflow is shattered by noise, when your day has completely unraveled, your ability to manipulate these linguistic levers is the only thing that connects you to another human being and secures the empathy or the assistance that you desperately need. Language is the ultimate interface of human connection, and today, we spent an hour looking directly at the source code.
The source code of human connection. I couldn't possibly phrase it any better. However, before we sign off, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over as you navigate the rest of your day.
Okay.
It is an idea that builds upon our discussion of efficiency in Section 4, but it takes it one philosophical step further. We spent a lot of time praising the invisible pronoun rule. We celebrated how, in order to speak faster and sound more natural, we actively delete words from our sentences. We proudly say, "the bag I lost," instead of the formal, cumbersome, "the bag which I lost."
The relentless human pursuit of linguistic efficiency.
Exactly. But here is the question I want you to consider. When we apply that rule, when we start systematically stripping away those connective words to save a fraction of a second, are we merely being efficient? Or does the act of removing those grammatical links subtly, subconsciously alter how attached we actually feel to the things we are describing?
That is an interesting thought.
Think about the physical nature of the sentence, the backpack, which I love very much, the word which functions as a literal bridge. It is a physical link in the structure of the sentence holding the human and the object together in the same breath. When we delete it in a rush, we remove the bridge.
The physical connection is gone.
If language truly shapes our perception of reality, as so many cognitive scientists believe, what happens to the emotional weight of our descriptions when we begin to prioritize raw speed over solid structure? Do our stories become faster, but inherently lighter? Do we perhaps become slightly more detached from the items we lose, simply because we no longer take the time to build the grammatical bridges required to hold on to them? It's just a little something to think about the next time you catch yourself rushing through a story. Until next time, keep jiving deep.